Okay, I thought that I'd continue my video, or at least try to add to it somehow. So this is Cosma Visions, and actually I really like it. I don't know if it's because it doesn't, well, it is influenced clearly by the organization or the existence of sort of the more symbolic or archetypal tarot, but I like that it diverges enough from that it's interesting and fresh to me, at least. But anyways, yeah. It's more zoomed in this time. So, I don't know exactly where I left off. I did watch my own video, but I kind of jumped around, so, and I can be kind of slow. I think part of it is depression, but also being sort of put on the spot. Okay, I'll just show you these for now. Yeah, so the thing is, with the sexual instinct, at least the instinct descriptions by themselves, I know there's many different ones, whatever, but helped me in a way that I didn't expect it to help me. And however you might want to conceptualize it now, I think psychology might link it to something like a disturbed attachment style. In fact, I have evidence of both avoidance in attachment and anxiety in attachment. So that's kind of a mixed bag, depending on whatever, kind of like maybe disorganized attachment. Because actually I've asked people who are knowledgeable on this topic about the specific scenario that, say in pretty much like every relational aspect, including family, including friendship, I don't necessarily feel a deep emotional bond. Not that doesn't, avoidant attachment doesn't mean there is no attachment, or at least like, I don't know, I'm tempted to, I don't necessarily think of it that way. I think there's a sort of intentional distance put between you and a potential object of attachment, for whatever self-protective reasons. But it's again, I don't know if this like aligns with research or not, or how people conceptualize it per se. I mean, as in psychologists, but I'm tempted to differentiate between those who truly just don't attach, whether it is for they're psychologically divergent, if you will, just sociopathy, psychopathy, potentially. I'm not saying all of them are under that umbrella, but yeah, from avoidant attachment, which is a reaction to the threat of attachment, if that makes sense, or whatever potentially aversive thing that you might be expecting, that, I mean, many of us struggle to even put into words. But yeah, and I've kind of never felt close to my parents, even when I was young, and actually I've been going through, at my request, chemotherapy with a counselor who does that, who's familiar with it, and he has kind of suggested certain links in my childhood experience and why I might have ended up developing avoidant attachment. And honestly, it makes logical sense, even though I'm like, I didn't care that, I received corporal punishment. But the thing is that, like, by their own description of me, by my own parents' description of me, I was very well behaved since I was born, that I could be left alone to play and wouldn't complain or things like that, you know. And I wasn't causing a ruckus. Even though I can be mischievous, but I wasn't like doing dangerous things. But so it sounds like an easy child, right? So why would you why would you do that to an easy child? And not just corporal punishment, but I don't know. I when I think about those things, I'm like, well, I didn't care. I wasn't even attached to my parents at that point, or I didn't care about it. And you know, a lot of people receive stuff like that in their childhood, and they're fine. And I don't think it's obviously it's never is a single factor, is it? I don't know, but and there could be things potentially like, oh, that's cool. You see this? I hope it gets that as the assigns that as the icon for this video. It's cool. Okay. Anyways, this was not supposed to be about attachment. I mean, I don't know. I feel like so there's a lot of, not just within psychology, but because I tend to kind of skim read things a lot of times, not necessarily in like full total depth, cover to cover, so to speak, because I can't. It's just the parts that retain my interest or attention. But anyways, I mean, I wonder if there is some sort of, because when you interact with babies or infants, I feel like, first of all, they might have a more sort of sophisticated comprehension of things. I don't want to call it necessarily just pure cognition, because it's very, it means thought. So and obviously it goes beyond, but like at the same time, it's I'm speaking to something a bit more, can I call it visceral, because feelings have a physiological basis. But I don't know if it's that one goes through sort of social learning after one is born, or what, but I feel like potentially babies could understand, just because we don't have access to that part of us necessarily, in terms of clearly recognized and verbalized, potentially verbalized memories per se. Like, I'll give an example. So this was, I don't know, around the age of 2, maybe less, that I was getting my ears pierced, or well, my parents did, obviously, because I didn't have a choice in that. And I distinctly remember, and I've asked well, anyways, let me just tell you what happened. I distinctly remember, this is my first memory in life that I know of, and I have a very clear memory of obviously being in pain from the ear piercing, but also in response to my cries, they handed me a toy, and I was confused. I mean, even at that age, I remember this feeling of confusion because it didn't help my pain. Obviously, at the time, I had limited sort of theory of mind abilities to realize, especially when you're under pain, like, it's hard to think anyway, even as an adult, but I didn't realize that, you know, to adults, it was kind of like less hassle, or a kid is distracted, that kind of thing. But to me, I was crying because I was in pain, right? And that was not sort of solved by that. And so this is what I mean, that, and I know there's different levels of potential precociousness and such, but at the same time, even interacting with other babies, See, like, so I've never felt, I can't say that I've really loved anybody. Not that I can recognize it in myself, and I'm very honest about that because I think that's a rare thing, and I'd never like force it or anything like that. But there was one small like baby or infant. Okay, I'm going into like this whole new tangent, but anyways, I related to that baby, the only baby I've ever met in my life that I related to, just on the level of sensitivity. And the mom, she was not like, I wouldn't say that she kind of stood in as a parallel to my own parents or anything like that, but she was like to the infant who's just like who doesn't understand all this, what she was, the concepts she was referring to. She's like, oh, babies are so manipulative, aren't they? I'm like, what the heck, lady? And I think she might have been serious, and I didn't like that. I think he was, or at least in my perception, a very sort of, I think it was a he, right? Whatever it was, he was a very sensitive child, and it reminded me of myself, or it reminds me of myself. And maybe a child that maybe needed a little bit more nurturing potentially, or a mom that didn't project malice or some sort of, not malice even, a complicated intent onto an infant. It's not just like one isolated incident or whatever. I'm talking about her general, like, sort of, obviously she also loved the baby, I'm not denying that, but just something about it, the whole thing, and the child made me like connect with it on a level that I've never before. And I feel like the baby could, or he was a toddler years later when I saw him, I don't remember, could detect that love because of his facial expression when he saw my facial expression or my sort of care. And I'm telling you, I've never like, I don't even want to, as of now, have a child. First of all, I don't want to pass on genetic things that just will make life hell for the child, but yeah. Anyways, I don't know how this thing became about. I'll have to make more videos because I was planning something else entirely, but this is where it went. Oh, I remember what I was talking about. Okay, so considering that, I wonder if there is a aspect of our sort of biology, neurology, or you know, as organismic beings, like maybe there are certain things that kind of, we understand things on many different levels. Cognition is one of them. Visual or symbolic is another, and symbols often, especially in psychodynamic theory, are charged with sort of affective components, right? It's kind of how they're conceptualized, and across many different schools of thought in psychology, there can be this sense of going from something relatively inchoate to relatively more mature or sophisticated. It doesn't matter which school you look at. I know I'm using a lot of psychodynamic language, but schemas, cognition, core beliefs, which are a deeper level of cognition, things like that. And not just developmentally, like not just as you grow up, but at any point in time, potentially. Yeah, so all of that, and I could just be woefully like uninformed about this sort of research. I have not looked into developmental research, even though a lot of my ideas kind of derive from those theories. But yeah, if there is something that is deeper, if you will, and a different kind of understanding or memory, whatever, than purely metacognitive, sort of linked with language, thoughts, especially from our earlier ages, could that potentially lay groundwork for some, like, what happens at that level, like, trauma is very different from person to person, and also depends on which point of life you're in. And a lot of things I'm saying might be super obvious, I don't know, but I wish, if it hasn't been, I wish that it were empirically investigated. Because, for example, there's also this idea, for example, because personality disorder is one of, just my favorite topics for studying, that borderline personality disorder is not necessarily associated with trauma or adverse experiences per se. Some people just develop it, and I'm just like, but based on self-report, like, and I know there might be some other reports, but how do you, like, how do you account for that level of development, that stage of development where memories are beginning to take shape and over time become more long-term instead of transient? I mean, heck, even now they might be transient to a degree, and obviously they can be altered when you think about them. That's another thing. But okay, I mean, this video is not going to end up being that much about the Enneagram, I think. It was still fun to make. So coming back to my attachment style, what I was trying to say is, I wonder if it might be, and it always is obviously multifactorial, reciprocal, probably. Things interact with each other. Some of the most obvious ones that people have mentioned and continue to mention, research or elsewhere, is, genetics, environment, even, when it comes to psychology, temperament or whatever, which is more seen as sort of incipient proclivities. And yes, babies are different, even when they're, like, very young. Some are more cautious, some are more mischievous. And all of that does set the groundwork for their inner subjective experiences, undoubtedly. But it's such a complex topic, and I don't know if I can write off the potential role of, if you don't want to call it trauma, because trauma to me is something that is deeply, I don't even want to say hurtful, it just kind of goes beyond hurt. It's severe enough that it disorganizes you in all sorts of ways internally. You can't process it immediately. It takes you a long time, often years. And when it hasn't been symbolized or brought towards the forefront of the consciousness, if you will, what does it become? I don't know, because like, infants can't entirely talk, right? Like I said, I was trying to, and I'm actually thinking about this that I'm saying, and I know a lot of these things are, like, so commonly mentioned. I'm not saying anything new, but it's still like, I'm just beginning, because I was crying because I was in pain, but the response didn't do anything for my pain. It was all about the adult, right? Because they have one little less hassle to deal with. Also sort of limited empathy towards infants, honestly. Like, we all do, even at this point in my life, maybe I do too. So yeah, I'll just try to, like, create those panoramas, I guess. So what I'm trying to say is this idea of, some people call it pre-verbal, perhaps, whatever it is, that was not understood, was not encapsulated in a symbolic experience that was internalized. And I know I'm using a lot of psychodynamic language, but as far as I know, there's also neuroscience backing up potential developmental stuff. I think there's neuroscience as well, but kind of the idea that certain like neural sort of networks or connections get made that potentially might underlie, and this goes back to all the symbols, schemas, patterns, whatever you want to, that might underlie everything, the basic like our sense of phenomenology, our sense of like anything, sense of self, sense of the world, sense of literally anything that you can think. I know this is probably going to like big abstract philosophy territory, and I'm not using this very specific words of it. It's because philosophy kind of frustrates me, to be honest, if I go too deep into it. But a lot of their concepts are very useful. But anyways, yeah. So there could have been things that might have happened at that level, is what I'm trying to say. Especially since I was actually, when I was born, for the first few months, several months, maybe even a year, I don't know, I was actually with my mom and grandmother, our mom's mom. And also like doing this at the same time. As you can see, I'm gonna create it and I'll show you. And I had not seen my dad because he was not allowed to visit me, apparently because of work or something, I don't know, for several months. And eventually my mom, left to, because initially she was with the parents because she's gonna give birth. I was the first baby and everything, and obviously it helped her to have them by her side. But based on a lot of different descriptions, I might have been very close to my grandmother as an infant, and I was essentially just like, in a sense, might even have been potentially, I don't know if it sounds dramatic, I don't have that memory, but torn from her, right? Because, and I don't feel like going into too much detail actually, but I have reasons to believe why this was a deeper level of attachment than people might necessarily realize based on her reaction to that. And even as a little kid, now I'm not, but as a little kid, I don't remember feeling particular like emotional sort of intimacy with either of my parents, but I felt really warm and happy and fuzzy around my grandmothers, like my maternal grandmother. Like she's the only person around whom I felt that way. And it's just, I don't know. So yeah, where was I going with that? So that does make me wonder if there might be some sort of foundational something somewhere in my body, brain, whatever, mind, that could underlie that level of avoidance and attachment. Because although I never hated my parents, I did feel kind of grossed out at the idea of being close to them in any way. And now that I think about it, some of the ways that, even at present, I don't know if they did that back then, but even so, you can kind of see general proclivities and behavior. Now I know people change, but I can imagine, I can understand why somebody wouldn't want to be close to somebody who's treating them that way, unintentionally or whatever. But I'm not saying they were evil, or anything like that. People try their best, but it is what it is. I'm getting tired now.